The dissonance Freya Morgan's bow hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the conductor to notice. His dark eyes narrowed and a collective tension rippled through the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra. "Ms. Morgan," Dominic Vega said, his Spanish accent more pronounced when irritated. "That's the third time you've missed the entrance. Perhaps you'd like to practice that passage alone while the rest of us take 5? Heat crawled up Freya's neck as 50 pairs of eyes turned toward her. 6 months ago, she'd been celebrated as the youngest principal cellist in the orchestra's history. Now, under the new conductor's exacting standards, she felt like a fumbling student. "I've got it, maestro," she said, straightening her spine. "No need to stop." Dominic's expression remained impassive. "From measure 84, everyone." The rehearsal dragged on for another hour. When Dominic finally dismissed them, Freya exhaled slowly, her fingers stiff from gripping her bow too tightly. Around her, musicians packed up instruments with the hurried energy of prisoners granted parole. "He's brutal," whispered Natasha, the second-chair violinist. "But they say that's why the Berlin Philharmonic became world-class under him." Freya nodded absently, watching Dominic converse with the concertmaster. At 38, he was relatively young for a conductor of his stature. His reputation had preceded him. Brilliant, uncompromising, and private to the point of reclusiveness. "Drinks at Sullivan's?" Natasha asked. "Half the string section is drowning their sorrows tonight." "I should practice," Freya said. "Apparently I need it." After everyone left, Freya returned to the empty stage. The concert hall's perfect acoustics amplified even her footsteps. She settled into her chair, adjusted her end pin, and began working through the troublesome passage from Dvořák's cello concerto. "Your tempo is inconsistent." Freya startled, nearly dropping her bow. Dominic stood in the shadows of the wings, arms crossed. "I thought everyone had left," she said. "Clearly." He approached, his movements fluid and deliberate. "You rush the 16th notes, then compensate by dragging the 8th notes that follow." Freya bit back a defensive response. "I'm working on it. Show me." She hesitated, then positioned her fingers on the fingerboard. With Dominic standing so close, watching her every movement, her normally steady hands felt clumsy. She played the passage, wincing at the imperfections. "Again," he said. "But this time, breathe." "I am breathing." "No, you're surviving." "Breathe with the music." His voice softened unexpectedly. "This passage isn't about technical precision. It's about longing." Something in his tone made Freya glance up. For a brief moment, his professional mask slipped, revealing something raw beneath. "The composer wrote this after falling in love with someone he couldn't have," Dominic continued. "Play it like your heart is breaking, not like you're racing to finish a marathon." Freya closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and began again. This time she let the notes rise and fall like waves, each phrase a confession. When she finished, the silence between them felt charged. "Better," he said simply. "Thank you for the advice." "Maestro," she replied, surprised by his patience. "Dominic," he corrected. "Maestro is for rehearsals." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression hardening instantly. "Lock up when you leave," he said, already turning away. "And Miss Morgan?" "I expect perfection at tomorrow's rehearsal." Just like that, the wall was back up. Freya watched him stride away, wondering about the momentary connection they'd shared. One minute he was showing her surprising insight and vulnerability. The next he was cold and distant as she packed up her cello. Freya couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Dominic Vega than his fearsome reputation suggested. The man who had spoken about heartbreak and longing seemed at odds with the exacting tyrant who terrorized the orchestra. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across the pavement as Freya walked to her apartment 6 blocks away. The upcoming winter concert series would make or break her career, and Dominic Vega would be the one deciding which way it went. She had 6 weeks to earn his respect, and after today's rehearsal, that mountain seemed impossibly steep to climb. The crescendo. The first snowflakes began falling at 3 in the afternoon, delicate and harmless. By 7, Philadelphia was buried under 8 inches of snow, with more accumulating by the minute. The city had effectively shut down, including public transportation. "This is ridiculous," Freya muttered, staring out the concert hall's glass doors at the white wasteland. The evening rehearsal had been canceled for everyone except principal players, and now even they were being sent home as the storm intensified. Everyone except Freya, who had stayed behind to work on her solo. "Still here, Ms. Morgan?" Freya turned to find Dominic approaching, his black sweater and slacks a stark contrast to the snow-bright windows behind her. "My apartment's walking distance," she explained. "I thought I'd wait until the plows come through." He nodded, glancing at his watch. "The maintenance staff has left. It's just us now." An awkward silence settled between them, punctuated by the building's creaks as wind battered its exterior. "I was about to make tea in the green room," Dominic said unexpectedly. "Would you care to join me?" Freya blinked in surprise. "Sure." The green room was warm, with worn leather couches and framed photographs of legendary musicians who had performed with the orchestra. Dominic filled an electric kettle while Freya studied the photos. "That's Jacqueline Dupre," Dominic said, nodding toward a black-and-white image of a woman with a cello, one of the greatest cellists of all time. "I know," Freya replied, unable to keep the defensiveness from her voice. "She's one of my idols." Dominic handed her a steaming mug. "Of course. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise." As they settled onto opposite ends of a couch, the building's lights flickered once, twice, then plunged them into darkness. "Perfect," Freya sighed. A moment later, the emergency lights activated, casting everything in a dim blue glow. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, visible in the security lights that illuminated the building's perimeter. "It appears we may be here for a while," Dominic said, pulling out his phone. "No service. The storm must have affected the cell towers." Freya hugged her knees to her chest, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "So, what do we do now?" Dominic considered her for a moment. "Tell me why you became a cellist." The unexpected question caught her off guard. "My father was a luthier. He made string instruments. I grew up surrounded by them. That explains your technical skill, but not your passion." Freya took a sip of tea, wondering why his assessment bothered her so much. "When I was 8, my mother died of cancer. For months afterward, my father couldn't bear to work on instruments. Our house was silent." She traced the rim of her mug. "One day I picked up a small cello he had made. I didn't know how to play, but I started drawing the bow across the strings anyway." Dominic watched her intently as she continued. "My father came running. I thought he'd be angry, but instead he sat beside me and showed me how to hold it properly. It was the first time I'd seen him smile since my mother died." Freya looked up. "That's when I knew music could heal people." Something shifted in Dominic's expression. "Your father must be very proud of you." "He died last year," she said quietly. "Heart attack. The night before my audition for principal cellist." "Yet you still auditioned." "It's what he would have wanted." She set down her mug. "Your turn." "Why conducting?" Dominic was silent for so long that Freya thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Control." "Control? My childhood was chaotic. My father was a pianist with bipolar disorder. Brilliant when he was well, terrifying when he wasn't." Dominic stared into his tea. "Music was the only constant. The only thing I could predict and rely on. Is that why you're so demanding with the orchestra?" A small smile touched his lips. "Partly, but also because I know what this orchestra is capable of." He looked at her directly. "What you're capable of?" The blue emergency light softened his features, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. For the first time, Freya saw past the intimidating maestro to the man beneath. "Why did you leave Berlin?" she asked. "Everyone says you were headed for legendary status there." His expression clouded. "Sometimes success comes at too high a price." Before she could press further, a deafening crack split the air. They both jumped to their feet as something heavy crashed onto the roof above them. "That sounded like a tree branch," Dominic said, grabbing his coat. "We should check for damage." They made their way through dim corridors to the administrative offices on the top floor. Water was already seeping through the ceiling in the conference room, dripping steadily onto the polished table. "We need to contain this," Dominic said, immediately taking charge. "Find something to catch the water. I'll look for maintenance supplies." Working together, they managed to position trash cans under the leaks and use tablecloths from the donor reception closet to soak up water. When they finished, both were damp and chilled. "There are extra clothes in the performers' dressing rooms," Freya suggested, "for emergencies." 20 minutes later, they sat before a small space heater Dominic had found, wearing oversized Philadelphia Symphony t-shirts and sweatpants, laughing at their bedraggled appearance. "I've never seen the great Maestro Vega in a t-shirt," Freya teased. "The orchestra wouldn't believe it." "Perhaps that's for the best," he replied, but his eyes were warm. "My reputation for terrifying musicians might suffer irreparable damage." As the night deepened and the storm raged on, they talked about music, literature, travel, discovering surprising commonalities and fascinating differences. Dominic revealed a dry sense of humor Freya would never have suspected. She found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone. In the strange blue light of their snowbound sanctuary, the barriers between conductor and musician slowly dissolved, replaced by something neither had anticipated: understanding. The counterpoint. 3 weeks after the snowstorm, rumors ricocheted through the orchestra like errant notes. Something had changed between the fearsome conductor and the young principal cellist. Everyone sensed it, though no one could precisely articulate what was different. "He actually smiled when you played that solo passage," whispered Natasha during a rehearsal break. "I nearly fell off my chair." Freya concentrated on adjusting her end pin. "He smiles occasionally. He's human. Not at the rest of us he doesn't," Natasha countered. "And don't think people haven't noticed how you two sometimes speak in half sentences, like you're continuing private conversations." Heat crept into Freya's cheeks. Since their night stranded at the concert hall, she and Dominic had developed a tentative friendship. Coffee before rehearsals, discussions about interpretation that sometimes stretched into early evening, text messages about books and recordings they'd mentioned to each other. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Yet Freya couldn't deny that something was building between them, a resonance that grew stronger each day. "There's nothing to notice," she insisted. "He's a colleague who happens to be passionate about the same things I am." Natasha's knowing look made it clear she wasn't convinced. Later that afternoon, Harrison Weber, the symphony's executive director, called Freya into his office. With his silver hair and custom suits, Harrison embodied the intersection of art and business that kept the orchestra financially viable. "Freya, your work these past months has been extraordinary," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "Particularly your interpretation of the Dvořák. Dominic speaks very highly of your talent." "Thank you," she said, wondering why this conversation required a private meeting. Harrison steepled his fingers. "As you know, our winter tour begins next month. Berlin, Vienna, Prague, the most prestigious venues in Europe." He smiled. "The Berlin Philharmonic has specifically requested that you perform the Dvořák Cello Concerto as a featured soloist during our collaborative concert." Freya's heart raced. "That's incredible." "Indeed. Dominic's connections there have opened remarkable doors." Harrison's expression grew serious. "However, I feel obligated to address certain observations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The symphony world is small and intensely political," he continued. "Your relationship with Dominic has not gone unnoticed." "We're colleagues," Freya said firmly. "Perhaps. But perception matters as much as reality." Harrison leaned forward. "This solo opportunity must be above reproach. No one can suggest you received it for any reason other than your exceptional talent." Freya felt as if she'd been slapped. "Is that what people are saying?" "Not yet. But I've been in this business for 30 years. These situations follow predictable patterns." His voice softened. "I'm not questioning your professionalism or Dominic's. I'm merely suggesting caution." After leaving Harrison's office, Freya found herself walking aimlessly through the concert hall corridors, mind whirling. The Berlin solo was the opportunity of a lifetime, one that could launch her career to international prominence. Yet Harrison's warning had tainted her excitement. She was so distracted that she nearly collided with Dominic as he emerged from the rehearsal room. "Freya," he said, his face lighting up in a way that made her stomach flip. "I was looking for you. I assume Harrison told you the news?" Yes, she managed. It's incredible. Thank you for recommending me. I didn't recommend you, he corrected. I simply told them you were the finest cellist I've worked with. The invitation was entirely their decision. The sincerity in his voice made her conflict sharper. People are talking, Dominic. His expression shifted. About us, you mean? Harrison suggested our friendship might create the impression that my opportunities aren't earned. Dominic's jaw tightened. That's absurd. Your talent speaks for itself, does it? Freya ran a hand through her hair in frustration. You're the conductor. You decide who gets solos, who gets featured, who advances. There's an inherent power imbalance. I've never made a professional decision based on personal feelings, he said stiffly. I know that, but appearances matter. She met his gaze directly. I've worked my entire life for opportunities like Berlin. I can't have people questioning whether I earned them. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like pain. So what are you suggesting? I think we need to be more careful. More professional. The words felt like stones in her mouth, at least until after the tour. Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, formal. Of course, I understand completely, Ms. Morgan. The return to her surname felt like a door closing between them. He nodded once, then walked away, leaving Freya alone in the corridor, wondering if she'd made the right choice. The following weeks were a masterclass in professional distance. Dominic conducted rehearsals with precision and detachment. Freya played with technical perfection. Their interactions became purely musical, witnessed by dozens of pairs of eyes. Yet sometimes, when the orchestra was focused on their scores, Freya would look up to find Dominic watching her with an expression that made it hard to breathe, as if he were trying to tell her something that couldn't be said aloud. And sometimes, despite her best intentions, she would respond with a glance that revealed everything she was trying to conceal. The Harmony Berlin in December was a city transformed by frost and festivity. Christmas markets filled public squares, the scent of mulled wine and roasted chestnuts mingling with the cold air. Snowflakes danced in the golden glow of street lamps as Freya walked back to the hotel after an evening rehearsal with the Berlin Philharmonic. Tomorrow night would be the collaborative concert, the Philadelphia Symphony joining forces with one of the world's greatest orchestras. Freya's solo would be the centerpiece, a cultural exchange elevated to art. She should have been ecstatic. Instead, she felt hollow. The past month had been professionally triumphant but personally miserable. Maintaining distance from Dominic had been both necessary and excruciating. Each day of careful avoidance had only strengthened her awareness of how deeply she cared for him. Lost in thought, she almost missed the figure waiting in the hotel lobby. Dominic, still in his rehearsal clothes, pacing near the elevators. Miss Morgan, he said formally as she approached. Do you have a moment? There's something we should discuss about tomorrow's performance. Several orchestra members lounged nearby, watching with undisguised curiosity. Freya nodded. Of course, Maestro. They took the elevator to the hotel's rooftop terrace. Despite the cold, it offered privacy they couldn't find elsewhere. The Berlin skyline glittered around them, the famous TV tower illuminated against the night sky. Once alone, Dominic's professional demeanor dissolved. I can't do this anymore, Freya, her heart stuttered. Do what? Pretend. He ran a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration. Pretend I don't care about you. Pretend I don't think about you constantly. Pretend watching you play doesn't move me in ways I can't explain. Freya gripped the terrace railing, steadying herself against the emotion in his voice. Dominic, we agreed. I know what we agreed, he interrupted. And I've respected it. But tomorrow you'll play the concerto that brought us together and I'll conduct. And I can't bear the thought of that moment being empty of what we both feel. A gust of wind swept across the terrace, carrying snowflakes that melted on Freya's cheeks like tears. People will talk. They already talk. He stepped closer. But what they don't understand is that this us, it's not about power or position. It's about recognition. Recognition? His dark eyes held hers. From the first rehearsal, I recognized something in you that mirrored something in me. A wound that healed into music. A loneliness that found its echo in another person. He touched her cheek gently. I've spent my life controlling every variable, Freya, but I can't control how I feel about you. Before she could respond, the terrace door opened. They stepped apart quickly as Thomas Bergman, the Berlin Philharmonic's concertmaster, emerged. Ah, there you are, he said in accented English. Dominic, the artistic director, has been looking everywhere for you. Dominic straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. I was just discussing tomorrow's tempo with Ms. Morgan. Thomas nodded, but his knowing smile suggested he wasn't fooled. Well, he wants to speak with you about next season. Something about a permanent position. After Thomas left, Freya turned to Dominic in shock. Permanent position? Here in Berlin? Dominic hesitated. They've approached me about becoming their principal guest conductor. It would mean splitting my time between Philadelphia and Berlin. That's incredible, Freya said, genuinely happy for him despite the implications. When would you start? I haven't accepted yet. He held her gaze. There are factors I need to consider. The weight of what remained unsaid hung between them as they stood beneath the Berlin sky, their breath fogging in the cold air. The night of the concert arrived with all the nervous energy and anticipation that accompanied significant performances. Backstage was controlled chaos, musicians warming up, stage managers checking details, distinguished guests being escorted to prime seats. Freya waited in a small practice room, running through the concerto's most challenging passages one last time. A knock at the door revealed Natasha. It's packed out there, she reported. Every important critic in Europe, plus half the classical music world. Freya took a deep breath. No pressure then. Natasha studied her friend. Have you figured it out yet? Figured what out? What you're going to do about Dominic? Natasha raised an eyebrow at Freya's surprised expression. Please, everyone with eyes can see it. The question is whether your career or your heart will win. Before Freya could respond, the stage manager appeared. 5 minutes, Ms. Morgan. As she waited in the wings, Freya watched Dominic conduct the opening piece. He was magnificent, commanding yet fluid, drawing sublime music from the combined orchestras with subtle gestures. The audience was entranced. When it came time for her concerto, Freya walked on stage to enthusiastic applause. She settled into her chair, adjusted her evening gown, and looked up to meet Dominic's gaze. In that moment of connection, everything else, the audience, the critics, the career implications, faded away. There was only the music they were about to create together. Dominic raised his baton. Freya lifted her bow, and then they began. What happened next transcended technical perfection. The music flowed between them like a conversation, intimate, honest, revealing. When Freya played the passage about longing that they had discussed months ago, Dominic's eyes never left hers. Conducting as if they were alone in an empty concert hall during a snowstorm, the audience sensed it too. The usual coughs and shifts that punctuated performances ceased. The hall held its collective breath as conductor and soloist communicated something profound through Dvořák's notes. When the final chord resolved, there was a moment of absolute silence before the audience erupted. The applause was thunderous, immediate, the kind of response musicians dream about but rarely experience. Freya stood for her bow, flushed with emotion. Dominic extended his hand, leading her to the front of the stage. As they stood together before the audience, his fingers tightened around hers, a silent acknowledgement of what had just passed between them. Later, at the reception, critics and patrons surrounded Freya with praise. Transcendent, they called her performance. Career-defining. Through it all, she was acutely aware of Dominic across the room, engaged in serious conversation with the Berlin Philharmonic's artistic director. Thomas Bergman appeared at her elbow with champagne. You've caused quite a stir, he said, handing her a glass. Not just with your playing. Freya tensed. What do you mean? The concertmaster chuckled. When a conductor and soloist perform with such understanding, people notice. He sipped his champagne. Dominic was different when he conducted here before. Brilliant but cold, technical but not connected. He studied her over his glass. You've changed him. I don't think the position they're offering him is prestigious, Thomas continued, but it would mean dividing his life between two continents. The implication was clear. Whatever was growing between her and Dominic now faced a geographical challenge as well as a professional one. Across the room, Dominic concluded his conversation and turned, immediately finding her in the crowd. Their eyes met over the sea of black ties and evening gowns, and Freya knew that tonight had changed everything, again. The finale spring arrived in Philadelphia with a gentle persistence, coaxing green buds from seemingly dead branches. After the triumphant European tour, the orchestra had returned to their regular season, but nothing felt regular anymore. Freya sat in the empty concert hall, watching sunlight stream through high windows. In 2 hours, musicians would fill the space for their final rehearsal before tonight's season-closing gala. For now, though, the hall belonged to her and her thoughts. 4 months had passed since Berlin. 4 months of private dinners and public professionalism. 4 months of falling deeper into a relationship that still had no name, conducted in the margins of their musical lives, and now decisions loomed that could no longer be postponed. The Berlin Philharmonic had made their offer to Dominic official. Simultaneously, the Orchestre de Paris had invited Freya to audition for their principal cellist position, an opportunity her agent called once in a lifetime, Paris and Berlin. 200 kilometers apart geographically, but potentially worlds apart for their relationship. Freya began playing softly, an improvisation that meandered through her conflicted emotions. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Dominic until he sat beside her. "That's beautiful," he said. "You should write it down." She lowered her bow. "Just thinking out loud? About Paris?" His expression was carefully neutral, but Freya had learned to read the subtle signs of tension around his eyes. Among other things, she set her cello aside. "My audition is next week." Dominic nodded. "I know. Harrison mentioned it this morning after informing me that the board unanimously approved my arrangement with Berlin." He paused. "I'll conduct 6 weeks there, 6 weeks here, alternating throughout the season." "That's wonderful," Freya said, meaning it despite her uncertainty. "It's everything you deserve, is it?" He looked around the empty hall. "Sometimes I wonder what I actually deserve." The question hung between them, weighted with implications. After a moment, he reached for her hand. "Come with me to my office. There's something I need to show you." Dominic's office was austere except for a wall of recordings and musical scores. He went to his desk and removed an envelope from the drawer. "This arrived yesterday," he said, handing it to her. "From the Paris Orchestra?" Freya opened it with confusion that quickly turned to shock. Inside was a letter inviting Dominic to guest conduct for their upcoming season, including specific weeks when Freya would be performing as principal cellist. If she got the position. "You arranged this," she said, looking up at him. "I made a phone call," he admitted. "But the invitation is genuine. They've wanted me to conduct there for years." "So you're suggesting—" "I'm suggesting we stop pretending. Our careers and our relationship are separate, entities that must compete." He took the letter and set it aside. "I'm suggesting we find a way forward together." Hope fluttered in Freya's chest. "And the professional concerns? The power dynamics? I've spoken with Harrison. If you stay in Philadelphia, I've requested that all decisions regarding your position, solos, advancement, everything, be made by the artistic committee when I'm conducting." Dominic stepped closer. "Your career will rise or fall on your merit alone, as it should. And if I go to Paris? Then I'll conduct there when I can, and we'll meet in Berlin, and sometimes we'll be apart." He touched her face gently. "But we'll be together in the ways that matter." Freya leaned into his touch, allowing herself to imagine the possibility. "People will still talk." "Let them," Dominic said with unexpected vehemence. "I spent years measuring every action against others' expectations. Years denying myself connection because I thought isolation made me a better artist." His dark eyes held hers. "I was wrong, Freya. That night in the snowstorm taught me that music isn't just about control and precision. It's about being vulnerable enough to let someone else in." Outside, orchestra members began arriving, their voices echoing in the corridor. Soon they would need to resume their professional roles, conductor and musician, separated by the orchestra and protocol. "I need to think," Freya said. "There's so much at stake," Dominic nodded. "Of course. But before you do—" He hesitated, then pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I'm not proposing, not yet. That would be too much pressure while you're making these decisions." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a treble clef. "This is a promise," he continued. "Whatever you decide about Paris, whatever comes next for us professionally, I want to build something real with you, Freya. Something that transcends orchestras and continents and other people's opinions." With trembling fingers, she lifted the necklace. "It's beautiful, like the music we make together." He helped her fasten it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. "Now think about everything, Paris, Philadelphia, U.S., and know that whatever you decide, we'll find a way to make it work." That evening's gala concert was a celebration of endings and beginnings. The program featured selections from the pieces they had performed throughout the season, culminating in the Dvořák concerto that had defined their European tour. As Freya prepared backstage, Harrison approached with an unexpected guest, the artistic director of the Orchestre de Paris. "Ms. Morgan," the Frenchman said, kissing her hand, "your reputation precedes you. We are very much looking forward to your audition next week." "Thank you," Freya replied, suddenly aware of the weight of the silver pendant against her collarbone. "I'm honored by the invitation." "The honor is ours," he assured her. "And between us, the position is yours if you want it. The audition is merely a formality." After he left, Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. First Berlin, now Paris. You've become quite the international sensation." Freya touched the pendant thoughtfully. "It seems I have options." "Indeed," Harrison studied her. "Though I suspect your decision may involve factors beyond career advancement." Before she could respond, the stage manager called places. Freya picked up her cello and made her way to the wings. The concert hall was filled to capacity, the audience buzzing with anticipation. As she took her seat on stage, Freya glanced at the conductor's podium where Dominic would soon stand. For months, they had balanced on the knife edge between professional and personal. Tonight, that balance would shift. When Dominic walked on stage, the audience applauded enthusiastically. He acknowledged them with a bow, then turned to face the orchestra. His eyes found Freya's immediately, a silent question in their depths. She smiled and gave him the smallest of nods. His answering smile was brief but radiant. The concert proceeded flawlessly through the first half. During intermission, Freya remained in her seat, centering herself for the Dvořák. When the audience returned and settled, Dominic stepped onto the podium once more. Instead of immediately raising his baton, however, he turned to address the audience. "Tonight marks the end of a remarkable season," he began. "One that has challenged and changed us all." His gaze swept across the hall. "Music at its best is a conversation between composer and performer, between musicians, between the orchestra and you, our audience." He turned slightly toward Freya. "Sometimes, the conversation reveals unexpected truths. Sometimes it creates connections we never anticipated." A murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the typical pre-performance announcement. "As many of you know, I'll be dividing my time between Philadelphia and Berlin next season," Dominic continued. "What you may not know is that our extraordinary principal cellist, Freya Morgan, has been invited to join the Orchestre de Paris." Surprised applause erupted. Freya felt her colleagues' eyes on her. "Ms. Morgan has not yet announced her decision," Dominic said. "But whatever she chooses, I want to publicly acknowledge something I've kept private until now." Freya's heart raced. Was he really going to do this? "The finest music emerges when we are brave enough to be vulnerable," he said. "When we stop hiding behind technique and tradition and allow ourselves to connect honestly with one another." He looked directly at Freya now. "Ms. Morgan has taught me this, both as a musician and as a woman I have come to deeply admire." The hall was absolutely silent. "So tonight, as we perform Dvořák's concerto together, we do so not just as conductor and soloist, but as two people who have found in music a language for things that cannot otherwise be expressed. He smiled at the stunned audience. "Thank you for allowing us to share that with you." With that, he turned back to the orchestra and raised his baton. Freya lifted her bow, her decision already made. The music that followed was even more extraordinary than their Berlin performance. Passionate, nuanced, alive with unspoken understanding. When the final notes faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the concert hall. Taking her bows, Freya touched the silver pendant at her throat and smiled at Dominic. Tomorrow there would be headlines and gossip. There would be career decisions and practical arrangements. There would be challenges they hadn't yet imagined. But tonight, there was only music and truth and the space between notes where they had found each other. In the front row, Harrison Weber shook his head in amused resignation. Beside him, the artistic director from Paris leaned over to whisper something that made Harrison laugh and nod. Some conversations, it seemed, transcended words entirely.